Hey everyone, quick video for you today. So I was watching Charles Koss's most recent video on the melted staircase in the Hathor Temple in Egypt, and that's a pretty interesting case. That I believe might be calcifications. One of his proposals said it might be calcifications. I think there might be something to that, just like we saw at the GCF1 feature. The ceiling in one of those rooms had what appears to be stalactites, calcifications dripping off the top of that thing. Like it's been sitting there for a long, long time, and water in a wetter time period created those. So in the comments, Dan and I were doing a little back and forth, and we were talking about Hadrian and Temple of Hadrian. Now there are two temples of Hadrian. There's one in Rome, and there's one at Ephesus in Turkey. And I was talking to him about the one in Ephesus because there is a video that I'm going to link you guys to. I'm not sure about the storyline here, Ancient Lost City of the Amazons, but this video has very good footage of a walk around of the site of Ephesus. Now, when you Google search this site, all you see are these large, very fancy looking architectural features, arches and columns and facades. This piece right here is the most famous piece, and the Temple of Hadrian as well is more of a famous piece. What you'll notice about the Temple of Hadrian, if you zoom in, I guess that's as far as I can go, you can see bevel blocks in the construction, in the lower construction, and Dan had pointed out that some of them are recycled in the pavement, and I agree. There's lots of processed stones at this site in the pavement and in the reconstructed buildings. This is obviously a reconstructed building. This is not original. You can see traces here of mortar and fill around this structure, and then obviously all in the background, lots of mortar and fill. Maybe parts of this facade were original and they tried to stabilize it, but most of this in the background, all secondary, tertiary. And in Athens, there's also a Hadrian's Library. And as you can see here, this is bevel block construction. And you can see lots of square holes, some of them at corners, here, here, and just lots of what appears to be damage to the structure. But I'm going to say it's processing evidence again, because in the Rome example, we're going to see a lot more of these square holes. Now, I've tried to save a bunch of really high quality pictures, and we're going to go through those in a second. But just take all this in for a second. All these square holes in the wall and also in the columns. Don't rule those out. Those aren't just damage from rifle fire or projectiles. Some of those are actually pretty square, and we're going to see some other pictures of those in a minute. Okay, first photo. This one's pretty good. First of all, you can see that some of these blocks are actually polygonal or trapezoidal. Some of them have odd row arrangements. Some of this stuff looks like it could be secondary to shore up a more eroded, older structure. You'll notice the older blocks are the ones with the holes in them. The new blocks that look better do not have any holes in them. And zooming in, you can see that they're not all square. Like this square hole would be, you would say, parallel with the rows and the blocks, but some of these are at odd little angles. And the scale of them, some of them are small and others are very large, and they're just kind of peppered throughout the original structure. And where you don't see them is obviously the newer blocks, I have to assume. Next photo, this is pretty good. This shows you where I believe some kind of doorway once existed with maybe a facade element that stuck out, and it was removed, shored up, and you can see some of the original, I'm going to say these are the coping or cornice elements laying on the ground that were originally up at the top. And at the very top here you can see this row of square holes. Now we've seen that lots of places over here as well, this row of square holes. In those scenarios, I have to assume that those were facade elements. Those were cornices and coping architectural elements, classical architecture stuff. We've seen that at Baalbek and lots of other sites. Some of the other little random stuff I don't know about. Those could be other fixtures and attachment points, but the scale, the haphazard nature of them, it really is baffling. Here's a good photo that shows you the original depth of the structure. The original base is down here, like a whole story below of what it is now. And you can see, I believe some of these darker gray stones, I don't know what's going on with those. They appear to be in between the lighter colored stones, maybe intentional artistic execution here, or maybe this is some indicative of some kind of later plastering, because you can see how it goes up to the bricks here. And I'm not sure if this is a broken stone with brick on top, or if this is smeared over the brick. We'll see if we can zoom in and see if the quality holds up. And that's about as close as I can get, and I'm gonna have to say that these darker stones are perhaps original, and the tops here are just heavily eroded, and that is why the bricks are added on top to create the new floor on top. So darker and lighter stones, black and white interspersed striped stones. That's pretty interesting execution. And again, from this angle, you can see some of these holes. Like this one looks really square to me, guys. And there's one right here in the corner that looks really square to me. Some of these other ones, they're so eroded or pitted out. I couldn't really say for sure, but some of these really do look like square holes for fixtures, or for what purpose, I don't know. If it had purposes, or if they're just evidence of processing marks, traces of the production process. And here's a good picture that shows the extent straight on of all the holes in the background, but also here you can see that some of these in the columns are definitely square, and perhaps they're in rows, evenly spaced, perhaps, or maybe just at all the seams. Sometimes that seems to be the case. There might be other examples where that's not the case. That is definitely a square hole. So interesting placement on all this damage, erosion, holes, square holes. Here's another good angle of the side that shows you the depth again, the original base of the structure. Some more of this hole damage. You know, I'm willing to admit some of this is projectile fire, but some of this other stuff is just way too square. Here and here, here. So what would that imply? Railings and beams, scaffolding for building? I'm not sure. I really don't know. I can assume that this is all for practical purposes, but then when you look in the background, how it's all peppered throughout these blocks in such a haphazard way, they can't all have been fixtures. It would have covered up the entire wall. Now, if some of it was artwork and the architectural elements, the decorative elements like cornices, I'm definitely willing to admit some of that, because we've seen that in other places. But some of this other stuff, I have not found existing evidence that would show that these were attachment points for anything or for any kind of fixtures. And another really good photo. Here you can see some of the striations on some of the blocks in the background that look pretty uniform, like done with a machine. And then you can see some more of this square stuff in some of these blocks. And even in areas where it's broken away, you might see square things. Definitely here in this column, look there. That's really good. And some of these scratches in these columns, I'm not sure about. If I zoom in, it'll be hard to tell. But very interesting, right? Very interesting evidence of something. And another good photo, straight on again. Only a select portion of the wall, though. This shows you where I believe the architectural elements were, the decorative elements like cornices. They would be going here, up here, and down here. So implying that these were doorway elements. Definitely here you can see the arch that's carved into the block above. This was more than likely an arched entryway with a little facade on top, decorative facade, and then up here maybe a longer one that extended further, maybe across the whole structure, that had another opening here where these darker blocks are. It's interesting that these blocks have 3 little holes here, and I'm not sure what to think of those. Perhaps an imitation of the older blocks, or for a functional purpose for when the later peoples were installing these darker blocks. But I have to assume that they are later. They are in much better condition, and they do not show any of the anomalies that the other blocks show. So, a tale of two Hadrians, and here at Ephesus, this is the most famous, well-known element of the site. But as you walk around the rest of the site, other impressive architecture is still apparent, but it starts to contain some anomalous features. Like, look at the damage, or what would you call this? I think this might be damage to get the clamps out. Someone carved into these blocks to get the metal out. That's the only thing I can think of. But here there's bevel block construction and some really anomalous damage. What would you say some of this damage is? It's at corners. It's not really square, but it shows there's hollows in the blocks maybe, or voids, spaces. So I really don't know about some of this stuff, but you can also see up here at the top, this over here is bevel block, but this wall in particular, this left wall, is all that block that has the cusp, that lip of stone on it, like I pointed out at the Menkaure funerary temple, at Baalbek, and at the Olympos Gate in Turkey. So it's an interesting connection here that they're right next to each other. They're side by side. They're part of the same construction. They're weathered the same. The color of the stone is the same, and they can contain the same anomalous damage, if you want to call this damage. But it's very interesting that the two styles of processing, the lip of stone on a smooth, finely dressed block, right next to bevel blocks. So and of course, a lot of the construction, the original construction, is down here on the ground. This is what Ziggy Dan was telling me, and I have to agree with him. A lot of the original building blocks have been reincorporated into the paths around it. And then, of course, surrounding the site, a lot of it has been organized. A lot of the rubble, that maybe a lot of it looks the same, cornice elements and stuff, that's all been stacked and organized and cataloged around the site. But there's still the foundations. They're still intact, and you can still see some of this evidence. The original, whatever this is still apparent in the original structure here at Ephesus. So I'll give you the link to that video, Viper TV Films. I'm not subscribed to them, but I do get recommended some of their videos through the Ancient History Criticisms channel, but also through my personal account. I sometimes come across their videos. Kind of a monotonous, monotone history lesson, I guess what we can say. That just different points of view, different historical references. But I just like to watch them for the footage that they bring me. Some of the stuff is, I guess, user submitted or fan submitted, but a lot of it is just tourists at the sites with really good quality video, and they really help us out. It's how we can see these sites without actually going to them. So I do appreciate these guys, and I might subscribe to them after I look at some more of their stuff and see if it's something I want to promote. But again, I want to promote the best researchers, and if this is if this channel has any kind of agenda or slant or bias, I'd really rather not promote them, even though they are giving us some good evidence here. So check this video out. Tell me what you guys think of this, and maybe check out Charles Koss's video on those melted stairs in Egypt, and let me know what you think of those. I think they're calcifications from evidence of vast age and a wetter time period. I could be wrong. Who knows? But that's all I got for today, guys. We'll continue with the list and some other things in the future, the next few days. But for now, thank you for hanging out with me, and we will talk to you next time.